Alright, buckle up because this is going to be a wild ride. Here's how it all started. I'm David Miller, 42, self-made construction mogul, living what most people would call the dream. Big house, fancy cars, lavish vacations, you name it, I had it. My wife Katie. She was the cherry on top of it all. Stunning, smart, charming. Our marriage was what everyone envied. Or so I thought. But you know what they say, right? The higher you fly, the harder you fall. A few months ago, Katie started acting off. At first, I brushed it off as nothing. She said she was stressed, busy with work. She's in real estate and things were picking up, so I didn't push. But little things started piling up. She'd stay late at work way more often than usual, and she'd get overly defensive when I asked about her day. She used to light up when we'd talk about weekend plans or vacations. Now she barely gave me a shrug. I'd notice her phone buzzing late at night, and she'd grab it quicker than a cat pouncing on a laser pointer. If I asked who it was, she'd roll her eyes and say, "Just work stuff, David. You know how demanding clients can be." But there was something about the way she said it, sharp, almost annoyed. Like I wasn't supposed to ask. Then there was her appearance. Katie was always beautiful, don't get me wrong, but suddenly she was putting in way more effort. New outfits, hitting the gym religiously, and let me tell you, the number of salon appointments went through the roof. She claimed it was for her job, presentation matters, she'd say. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the moment that truly set off alarms. One night, I came home from work earlier than usual. I walked in and Katie was on the phone. The second she saw me, she froze. Her face went pale like a kid caught with their hand in the cookie jar. She hung up so fast, she didn't even bother saying goodbye. I tried to play it cool. "Who was that?" I asked casually. She stammered. Just a client. Nothing important." But here's the kicker. Her phone was lying on the counter, and the screen lit up with the name Robert Walsh. "Robert Walsh, huh?" I asked. "That doesn't sound like one of your usual clients." Her face turned red. He's a new client. Bought a house last month and I'm helping him with some paperwork issues." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I nodded, pretending to accept it, but inside, I knew. Something wasn't right. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I called Mitch, my best friend and the guy who's always had my back. "Man," I said, "I think something's going on with Katie. I don't have proof yet, but my gut's screaming at me." Mitch didn't hesitate. "You need to dig, David. Find out the truth before you lose your mind over this." That's when the wheels started turning. I had no idea where this would lead, but one thing was clear, I wasn't going to sit back and let this slide. If Katie was lying, I was going to find out exactly what she was hiding. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Every smile Katie gave me felt fake. Every time she left the house, I wondered if she was going to see him, Robert Walsh. That name kept echoing in my head. Mitch came over the next day. We sat in the backyard with a couple of beers, and I laid it all out for him. "I need to know for sure, man. I can't live like this, feeling like an idiot in my own house." Mitch nodded, leaning forward. "Look, you can't do this alone. You need someone who knows how to dig without tipping her off. I know a PI, Rebecca Torres. She's good. Real good. I've used her before on a business deal where I suspected fraud. If Katie's hiding something, Rebecca will find it." It felt extreme, hiring a private investigator, but I was desperate for answers. Mitch gave me Rebecca's number and I called her that evening. Rebecca sounded sharp and professional on the phone, with a no-nonsense attitude that immediately put me at ease. "Mr. Miller," she said, "I've dealt with cases like this before. If your wife is seeing someone else, I'll find out. But I'll need access to certain things, her schedule, phone activity, places she frequents. Can you provide that?" I hesitated. Giving someone access to Katie's life felt wrong, but then I remembered the way she froze when I walked in on that phone call. "Yeah," I said. "Whatever you need." Rebecca wasted no time. She had me forward her Katie's work calendar, which she had conveniently synced to our shared email account. She also advised me to watch for patterns, repeated locations, strange behavior, or excuses that didn't add up. A week passed. I pretended everything was normal, keeping up appearances while Rebecca worked behind the scenes. Katie, on the other hand, was practically walking on air. She'd hum while getting ready for work, smile at her phone constantly, and spend hours texting late into the night. One night I casually asked, "You've been working a lot lately. Everything okay?" She barely glanced up from her phone. "Oh yeah. Busy season, you know how it is." But I didn't know. And I wasn't buying it. 2 days later, Rebecca called me with her first update. "Mr. Miller, your wife has been meeting a man named Robert Walsh at a coffee shop near her office every Wednesday. They sit in the corner, away from the windows, and talk for about an hour." My heart sank. "Talking, huh? That's it?" Rebecca paused. "So far, yes. But there's more. After the coffee shop, they leave separately. Then, about an hour later, she checks into a boutique hotel downtown. Alone." I swallowed hard. "And him? He's there too. Different entrance. Different floor." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. My worst fears were coming true, but I needed more. I needed undeniable proof before I confronted her. Rebecca continued, "I'll keep tailing them. I'll get you pictures, timestamps, everything. We'll build a case." When I hung up, Mitch called me right after. "What did she say?" I told him everything, my voice shaking. He didn't interrupt, just let me vent. When I finally finished, Mitch said, "You're doing the right thing, David. Just hang in there. The truth always comes out, one way or another." But knowing the truth was coming didn't make it any easier to live in the moment. Katie came home that night smiling like nothing had changed, kissed my cheek and asked how my day was. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers right then and there, but I played along. "Same as always," I said, forcing a smile. Inside, though, I was a volcano, ready to erupt. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Knowing Katie was sneaking around while pretending everything was fine at home, it tore me apart. I'd sit across from her at dinner, watching her scroll on her phone, wondering if she was texting Robert. Every time her phone buzzed, my chest tightened. I kept telling myself to stay calm, to wait for Rebecca to get the full picture. But the more I watched Katie, the more obvious her lies became. One evening, she came home later than usual. I asked her how work was, and she sighed dramatically, dropping her bag on the kitchen counter. "Exhausting. I had to meet with a really difficult client. I swear, some people just don't know what they want." I nodded, pretending to care, but my mind was racing. Was this difficult client Robert? The next morning, Rebecca called with another update. "David, I think we've got enough to confirm the affair," she said bluntly. My stomach dropped. "What did you find?" Rebecca hesitated, as if bracing me for a blow. "Last night, Katie checked into the same boutique hotel. We got photos of her and Robert arriving separately, within minutes of each other. They stayed there for about 2 hours before leaving." My heart was pounding. "Did you get pictures?" "Yes. I've emailed them to you, along with timestamps and notes. It's clear they're meeting there regularly." When I opened the email, my hands were shaking. There they were, Katie and Robert, walking into the hotel. She had that same confident, carefree smile she used to save for me. I stared at those pictures, feeling like someone had driven a knife through my chest. Rebecca's voice brought me back. "There's one more thing," she said cautiously. "What now?" "Robert isn't just some random guy. He has a pattern. I did some digging, and it turns out he's been involved with other married women, mostly real estate agents. He targets them. From what I've found, he uses these affairs to gain insider information on their clients and properties, and then he exploits it for his own business." It felt like the floor dropped out from under me. "Are you saying he's using Katie?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Rebecca replied. "And from what I've seen, she's completely in the dark about it." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Katie wasn't just cheating on me, she was being played like a fool. That night, I couldn't even look at her. She was sitting on the couch, scrolling on her phone, completely oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I wanted to yell at her, to shove the photos in her face and demand answers, but I knew it wasn't time. Not yet. I called Mitch instead. "You're not going to believe this," I said, and told him everything Rebecca had found. Mitch let out a low whistle. "Man, this Robert guy is something else. You've got to take them both down, personally and professionally." "I'm already planning it," I said. "But first I need more. I want Robert's whole game exposed. If he's screwing people over, I'm going to make sure everyone knows." Mitch laughed darkly. "I like the sound of that. Just let me know how I can help." As I hung up, I glanced at Katie, still sitting on the couch with that fake smile on her face. She thought she had me fooled, but she had no idea what was coming. After Rebecca's bombshell about Robert's shady business practices, I knew I couldn't just focus on Katie's betrayal. I had to take him down too. If he thought he could mess with my life and get away with it, he had another thing coming. I called Rebecca back the next morning. "I need you to keep digging into Robert Walsh. Everything, his business, his personal life, his connections. I want to know how deep his game runs." Rebecca didn't miss a beat. "I'll see what I can find. But David, this might get messy. People like Robert don't play fair." "Neither do I," I replied. While Rebecca worked her magic, I started laying my own traps. The first step: pretending everything was normal. It wasn't easy, but I played the role of the loving, clueless husband like a pro. Katie, meanwhile, seemed happier than ever. She'd hum while cooking dinner, send me sweet texts during the day, and even suggested we take a weekend trip together. "It's been a while since we've had some us time," she said with that dazzling smile that used to make me weak in the knees. I forced a smile back. "Yeah, that sounds great." But inside I was seething. I knew exactly why she was acting this way: guilt. She was trying to cover her tracks, make herself feel less guilty for sneaking around with Robert. A few days later, Rebecca called with another update. "David, I've been looking into Robert's business dealings, and let's just say they're not exactly above board. He's been using insider info from these women to undercut competitors, snagging properties for dirt cheap and flipping them for massive profits." "Can you prove it?" I asked. "I'm working on it. I've already found a few connections between him and some questionable property deals. It's enough to raise eyebrows, but I want more before we go public with anything." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Good. Keep at it. I want this guy's whole empire to come crashing down." That evening I sat in my home office, staring at the photos Rebecca had sent me. Katie and Robert, laughing together like they didn't have a care in the world. My jaw clenched as I thought about everything I'd done for her, how I'd built a life for us from the ground up, only for her to throw it all away for some con artist. I couldn't hold it in anymore. Mitch called to check in and I unloaded everything. "I don't just want to expose them," I said. "I want to ruin them. Personally and professionally. I want them to feel the same kind of pain they've put me through." Mitch didn't hesitate. "Then you need to play the long game. Don't act on emotion, plan every move. You've got the money and the connections to make this happen, David. Use them." He was right. If I wanted this to work, I couldn't rush it. I had to be smart, calculating, and patient. For now, I kept up the charade. I took Katie on that weekend trip she suggested, playing the perfect husband. We went to a cozy cabin in the mountains, and for a moment I almost let myself believe it was real. She held my hand, smiled at me like she used to, and even joked about how we should start planning for the future, maybe a second home by the lake. But then her phone buzzed, and I caught the way her face lit up when she glanced at the screen. She quickly tucked it away, but I knew. It was him. As we sat by the fireplace that night, sipping wine, she leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "I love you, David. You know that, right?" I didn't even flinch. "I love you too," I lied. In my mind, though, I was already thinking about how much sweeter it would feel to watch her and Robert's worlds come crashing down. Rebecca called me early Monday morning, her tone more urgent than usual. "David, I've hit on something big. Robert's name keeps coming up in connection with a guy named Alan Fisher, one of the real estate agents Robert supposedly worked with a few years back. Fisher got into legal trouble after a series of deals went south, and Robert somehow walked away unscathed." I frowned. You think Fisher took the fall for him? That's exactly what I think. Fisher's whole career tanked, bankruptcy, lawsuits, the works. But here's the kicker. Fisher might be willing to talk. I found out he's been living out of state, working small-time property deals. I can reach out if you want. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. Do it. If this guy's got dirt on Robert, I want every detail. While Rebecca tracked Fisher down, I started making some moves of my own. First, I called Mitch. I need a favor, I said. Name it, he replied. I want to put some feelers out about Robert Walsh in the business world. See if anyone else has had run-ins with him or heard whispers about what he's up to. If he's burned bridges, I want to know who and how. Mitch chuckled. Consider it done. You'd be surprised how fast rumors spread in this industry. That week, I kept my poker face on around Katie, even though every interaction felt like a test of my self-control. She was still doing her best to act like the perfect wife, but cracks were starting to show. One night, while we were sitting in the living room, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her face tightening for a split second before she slipped the phone into her pocket. Who's that? I asked casually, not looking up from the TV. She hesitated, then forced a smile. Just Sarah from work. She's having a meltdown about a listing falling through. I nodded, pretending to believe her, but I knew better. Rebecca had already confirmed she and Robert were still meeting regularly. Every time she lied, it fueled the fire inside me. By the end of the week, Rebecca had tracked down Alan Fisher and gotten him to agree to a meeting. I cleared my schedule and flew out to meet him in a small diner just outside Chicago. Alan looked rough, like a man who'd been chewed up and spit out by life. He was nervous at first, darting glances around the room like he thought someone might be watching. I don't know what you want from me, he said, stirring his coffee. That part of my life is behind me. I want the truth, I said firmly. About Robert Walsh. What he did to you, how he operates, everything. Alan sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. Robert's a snake, he said finally. He lures people in, makes them feel like they're part of some big plan, and then he stabs them in the back. He used me to get insider info on properties, had me do all the dirty work, and when it blew up he walked away clean. Left me to take the fall. Do you have proof? I asked. Alan nodded slowly. I kept copies of some emails and documents. I don't know why, maybe part of me hoped I'd get a chance to use them someday. They're not enough to take him to court, but they might help you figure out what he's up to. I felt a flicker of hope. That's all I need. Can you send them to me? He hesitated, then nodded. Yeah. Just promise me one thing, if you're planning to go after him, be careful. He's not the kind of guy you want to mess with. I thanked Alan and left the diner feeling like I'd just uncovered the first piece of a much bigger puzzle. Back at my hotel, I called Rebecca to fill her in. This is exactly what we needed, she said. With Fisher's documents and what I've already found, we can start connecting the dots. Give me a few days and I'll put together a full report. By the time I got back home, I was more determined than ever. Katie greeted me with a kiss and asked how my trip went. Productive, I said with a smile. She had no idea what was coming. Rebecca didn't waste time. By midweek, she sent me a detailed report tying Robert to several shady deals, using insider info from his affairs to gain an edge. Alan Fisher's documents backed it up, and Rebecca even uncovered recent transactions involving Katie's clients. It was clear, Katie wasn't just cheating, she was unknowingly feeding Robert sensitive information. Mitch called with his own findings. Word's out, man. A few folks in real estate circles already have suspicions about Robert. If you drop the right info, his reputation will crumble. I smiled. Good. Let's make sure it happens. But I wasn't ready to confront Katie or Robert just yet. I wanted them to think they were in control, until I pulled the rug out from under them. That night, Katie came home with takeout and kissed my cheek. Thought we could have a quiet night in, she said, her smile as fake as ever. I played along, laughing and chatting while my mind raced with plans. The evidence was piling up and soon their world would come crashing down. It was time to lay the groundwork. I reached out to a lawyer I trusted, explaining everything I'd gathered on Robert and Katie. "I don't just want a divorce," I said. "I want to expose Robert and make sure Katie has no idea what's coming." The lawyer nodded. "We'll keep it airtight. Let Rebecca keep gathering evidence. When the time comes, we'll hit them both where it hurts." Meanwhile, I enlisted Mitch's help to subtly leak information about Robert's shady dealings. Word spread fast in real estate circles, and Robert's name was quickly being whispered about in less than flattering ways. Katie, oblivious, kept up her act. "I've got a big client meeting tomorrow," she said one night, her phone buzzing in her hand. I smiled. "Good luck. Let me know how it goes." But I already knew the meeting was with Robert. Rebecca had tracked their every move, and I had a folder full of timestamps, photos, and emails to prove it. The trap was set. All I needed was the right moment to spring it. Katie's lies were starting to catch up with her, though she didn't know it yet. I kept playing the role of the oblivious husband, but I could see the tension creeping into her. She was on edge, checking her phone constantly, her smiles feeling more forced. One evening she came home looking frazzled. "You wouldn't believe the day I've had," she said, tossing her bag onto the counter. "Work drama?" I asked, feigning concern. "Yeah," she muttered, running her fingers through her hair. "Clients can be so demanding sometimes." I nodded, holding back a smirk. I knew the real reason she was stressed. Mitch had confirmed that the rumors about Robert's shady deals were spreading like wildfire. Some of his clients were backing out, and he was scrambling to keep his operation afloat. Meanwhile, Rebecca had uncovered another bombshell. Robert was actively trying to shift blame for his business problems onto Katie. Emails between him and his associates painted a clear picture. He was already preparing to throw her under the bus if things went south. "David," Rebecca said when she called that night, "we've got him. Between Fisher's documents, the shady deals, and his attempt to scapegoat Katie, there's more than enough to destroy his reputation." "What about Katie?" I asked, my voice tight. "She's implicated in some of the deals, but it's clear Robert manipulated her. Legally, she's not in as deep as he is. But, personally, you've got all the proof you need of the affair." I sat in silence for a moment, gripping my phone. "Good. Keep everything ready. It's almost time." The next day, Katie was unusually quiet. At breakfast she barely touched her coffee, staring blankly at the table. "You okay?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She blinked and forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." But her phone buzzed and I saw her flinch before she grabbed it. She glanced at the screen and quickly slid the phone into her pocket. I decided to push just a little. "You've been glued to your phone lately. Work blowing up?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah. It's been non-stop. You know how it is." I just smiled. "Sure." Later that day I had a meeting with my lawyer. He'd prepared everything I needed to confront Katie and Robert, but we agreed on one last step: hiring a forensic accountant. "If Robert's been moving money around or using insider information for deals, we'll find it," the lawyer said. It was another layer to the plan, another way to ensure they couldn't wriggle out of the mess they'd created. That evening, Katie suggested we have a date night. "We haven't had much time together lately," she said, her voice soft. "I think we need it." I agreed, keeping my expression neutral. She wanted to ease her guilt, and I was happy to let her try. We went to a nice restaurant and for a moment it almost felt like old times. She laughed at my jokes, held my hand across the table, and even talked about taking a vacation together. But every smile, every laugh, felt hollow to me. I knew the truth, and no amount of pretending could erase the betrayal. When we got home she leaned in to kiss me, but I pulled away, pretending to be distracted. "I've got some work to finish up," I said, heading to my office. Once inside I pulled up Rebecca's latest report. There it was, proof of her and Robert at the hotel just 2 nights ago, laughing and walking in together like they didn't have a care in the world. The cracks in Katie's perfect facade were growing, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the whole thing shattered. The time had come. I'd gathered everything: photos, emails, financial records, and Rebecca's detailed report. I wasn't just ready to confront Katie and Robert, I was ready to end this charade and make them face the consequences. I started with Katie. It was a Friday evening, and she came home looking tired, carrying her usual takeout bags. "Dinner's on me tonight," she said, placing the food on the counter. She flashed me a weary smile, the kind that used to make me feel warm inside. Now it just made me sick. "Katie, we need to talk," I said, my tone calm but firm. Her smile faltered. "What's wrong?" I gestured toward the dining table. "Sit down." She hesitated, her eyes narrowing slightly, but she sat. "You're scaring me, David." "What's this about?" I pulled out the folder Rebecca had compiled, setting it on the table between us. "I know, Katie. About Robert. About everything." Her face went pale instantly. "What are you talking about?" She stammered, trying to play dumb. I opened the folder, sliding a photo across the table, her and Robert entering the hotel. "This is what I'm talking about. Do you want me to keep going? Because there's plenty more where this came from." She stared at the photo, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for words. Finally she whispered, "David, it's not what it looks like." "Don't," I interrupted, my voice rising. "Don't lie to me again. I know about the affair. I know about the hotel. I know everything, Katie." Tears filled her eyes, but I wasn't buying it. She reached across the table, her voice cracking. "Please let me explain." I stood, shoving my chair back. "Explain what? That you betrayed me? That you've been sneaking around behind my back with some con artist who's been using you for insider info? What part of that needs explaining?" Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands, sobbing. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she choked out. It was a mistake, David." "A mistake?" I barked. "Mistakes don't last for months, Katie. Mistakes don't check into hotels or destroy marriages. This was a choice, 1,000 choices you made over and over again." She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "David, please. I was stupid, okay? I wasn't thinking straight. It didn't mean anything. I love you." I laughed bitterly. "You love me? That's rich, coming from the woman who couldn't even bother to cover her tracks. Do you even know who Robert really is? Or are you just as blind as I was?" Her brows furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" I leaned forward, my voice low and cold. "He's a fraud, Katie. He's been using you to get insider information for his shady business deals. And when the heat comes down, he's going to throw you under the bus. You were nothing but a pawn to him." She froze, her lips trembling. "No. That's not true. He wouldn't." "Wouldn't he?" I slid another document across the table. Emails between Robert and his associates, planning to scapegoat Katie. She stared at it, her hands shaking, and then she broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I didn't know he was using me." I crossed my arms, watching her crumble. "Well, now you do." The silence stretched between us, broken only by her quiet sobs. Finally I spoke again, my tone cold and final. "I've already talked to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. You're going to pack your things and leave this house by the end of the weekend." She looked up at me, panic in her eyes. "David, please don't do this. I can fix this. I'll do anything, just don't give up on us." I shook my head. "You already gave up on us, Katie. You just didn't think you'd get caught." Without another word I walked out, leaving her at the table with the weight of her lies crashing down around her. But I wasn't done. Next up, Robert Walsh. After Katie's meltdown, I didn't waste any time. I had one last piece of unfinished business: Robert Walsh. The man who thought he could wreck my life and walk away untouched. Rebecca confirmed he'd be at one of his usual haunts, a trendy cafe downtown he frequented for business meetings. I wasn't planning to meet him quietly. When I walked in, I spotted him immediately, sitting in a corner booth with his phone in hand. He looked smug, completely unaware that his little empire was crumbling. I took a deep breath and marched straight to him. "Robert Walsh," I said firmly, standing over his table. He looked up, confused at first, but his expression shifted to recognition. Then came the fake smile. "David Miller, right? Katie's husband. Small world. Not small enough, I said, sliding into the seat across from him without an invitation. His smile faltered. What can I do for you? I leaned forward, keeping my voice low but full of menace. You can start by explaining why you thought it was a good idea to mess with my wife and my life. He blinked, then chuckled like this was all some joke. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Don't play dumb, I snapped, pulling out a folder from my bag and slamming it onto the table. This is everything: your emails, your shady deals, the insider info you got from Katie. You've been caught, Robert. And trust me, this is just the beginning. He stared at the folder but didn't touch it. I could see the mask slipping, the calm, confident facade cracking under the weight of my words. You don't want to do this, he said finally, his voice low. Oh, I do, I shot back. Because I'm not just coming after you for what you did to my marriage. I'm coming for your entire operation. The clients you scammed, the deals you rigged, it's all going public. He smirked, though it was weaker now. You think you're the first guy who's tried to come after me? You don't have what it takes. I smiled coldly. Oh, I think I do. You see, I've got resources, money, lawyers, and a hell of a lot of people in this town who don't like you. And once this goes public, your name is going to be poison. Nobody's going to want to do business with you. You'll be finished. For the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. Oh, and by the way, you might want to tell Katie that you're planning to throw her under the bus. Because I've already shown her the emails. She knows everything now. He froze, his face going pale. You told her? Damn right I did, I said, standing up. You thought you could use her? Manipulate her? You're both going to pay for what you've done. But you're going to lose everything, Robert. And I'll be watching when it happens. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out, leaving him sitting there with the weight of his crumbling empire on his shoulders. That night, Rebecca sent me a message. Another client of Robert's had come forward, claiming he'd been cheated out of a property deal. The dominoes were falling faster than I expected. As for Katie, she packed her things and left the house the next morning, her face tear-streaked and her voice trembling as she tried one last time to apologize. But I didn't care anymore. I wasn't just ending my marriage, I was reclaiming my life. The days after confronting Robert were a whirlwind. The whispers about his shady dealings turned into full-blown accusations as Rebecca, my lawyer, and I strategically leaked the evidence. News spread quickly in the real estate world, and soon, Robert's name was everywhere, for all the wrong reasons. Mitch called me one afternoon, barely able to contain his excitement. David, it's happening. People are pulling out of deals with Robert left and right. He's losing clients, losing partnerships, it's chaos. Good, I said, a grim satisfaction settling over me. But that wasn't all. Rebecca's forensic accountant uncovered financial irregularities in Robert's business accounts. Money moved through shell companies, fraudulent appraisals, and payments that didn't add up. It was enough to bring in the authorities. I've already forwarded the findings to the right people, Rebecca told me. It's only a matter of time before he's under investigation. Meanwhile, Katie was struggling to keep up appearances. I heard through mutual friends that she'd taken a leave of absence from work, claiming personal issues. She tried calling me a few times, but I ignored her. I was done giving her any more of my energy. Then one night she showed up at the house unannounced. I opened the door to find her standing there, looking disheveled and desperate. David, please, she said, her voice cracking. I just need to talk to you. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. Talk about what, Katie? How sorry you are. How it was a mistake. I've heard it all before. She wiped at her tears. You don't understand. Robert, he's threatening me. He says if I don't back him up, he'll drag my name through the mud too. I stared at her for a long moment. You reap what you sow, Katie. I warned you he was a snake. You chose to trust him over me. Her face crumpled, and she sank onto the porch steps, sobbing. I didn't know it would end like this. I thought he cared about me. Cared about you? I said bitterly. He used you. Just like you used me when you decided I wasn't enough anymore. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. What am I supposed to do now, David? He's ruining my life. I stepped back into the house, keeping my voice cold. That's your problem to figure out. Not mine. And with that, I shut the door, leaving her on the porch. The next day, the final blow came. Robert's company was officially under investigation for fraud, and his assets were frozen. He was finished just like I'd planned. Mitch called again, laughing. Man, you did it. He's done. His clients are suing him, his name's dirt, and he'll be lucky if he doesn't end up in jail. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I could breathe again. Robert was out of the picture, and Katie was facing the consequences of her choices. As for me, I was already looking ahead, ready to rebuild my life, without them in it. After everything went down, life felt quieter. The chaos that had taken over my life for months was finally settling, leaving behind an eerie calm. But instead of feeling empty, I felt relief. Katie moved out completely a week after I shut the door on her. She sent a text, long and emotional, begging for forgiveness, claiming she wanted to fix herself, that she'd made the worst mistake of her life. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The divorce process started smoothly, thanks to the ironclad case my lawyer built. Katie didn't fight it. How could she? The evidence was overwhelming. She knew she had no leverage. As for Robert, his downfall became public news. Articles were written about the fraudulent deals, the lawsuits piling up, and the investigation into his company. It was satisfying seeing his smug face disappear from every professional circle we used to share. Mitch kept me updated, grinning every time he called. You've done it, man, he said during one of our calls. You've taken your life back. What's next? That question stayed with me. What was next? For so long, my energy had been consumed by uncovering the truth and seeking justice. Now that I had it, I wasn't sure what to do with myself. So, I started small. I threw myself into my work, focusing on projects that reminded me why I'd built my company in the first place. I hired some new people, reached out to old clients, and even took Mitch up on his offer to partner on a big project we'd been talking about for years. I also made time for myself, something I hadn't done in ages. I started going to the gym again, not to distract myself but because it felt good. I took long walks in the evenings, let the fresh air clear my head. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel weighed down by anger or betrayal. And then there was the cabin. Katie had mentioned a vacation during one of her fake date nights, and I decided to follow through, but not with her. I booked a weekend at the cabin alone, just to get away and think. It was strange being there without her, but it also felt freeing. One night, sitting by the fire with a drink in hand, I caught myself smiling. Not because of anything in particular, but because, for the first time in months, I felt at peace. That weekend I made a promise to myself: I wouldn't let this define me. Katie's betrayal and Robert's schemes had taken enough from me. It was time to reclaim my happiness. By the time I returned home, I was ready to move forward. Katie and Robert, they were just chapters in my story, ones I'd finally closed. It's strange how life shifts when you let go of the things weighing you down. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe, like I was no longer stuck in the shadow of someone else's lies. Katie and Robert were out of my life, and I intended to keep it that way. I blocked her number, deleted any lingering photos of us, and packed away everything that reminded me of her. It was time to start fresh. One day, Mitch stopped by with coffee and a grin plastered across his face. All right, man. You've done the revenge thing. What's next? Don't tell me you're going to work yourself to death now. I laughed. That's the plan, for now. Wrong answer, Mitch said, sitting on the edge of my desk. You need to get out there. Meet people. Live a little. I'm not ready for that yet, I said, shaking my head. Mitch smirked. Fair enough. But when you are, let me know. I've got a few ideas. I rolled my eyes but couldn't help smiling. A few weeks later I decided to take Mitch's advice, not about dating but about getting out of my comfort zone. I signed up for a few networking events, not to chase new business deals but to meet people who weren't tied to the wreckage of my past. At one event, I struck up a conversation with a woman named Rachel. She was smart, driven, and easy to talk to, someone who radiated confidence without arrogance. We bonded over work stories, both of us laughing at how ridiculous clients could be. At the end of the night, she handed me her card. "If you ever want to grab coffee and talk shop, give me a call." I took the card, unsure if I'd use it. But it felt good to know there were people out there worth getting to know. Meanwhile, work continued to thrive. Mitch and I secured that big project we'd been chasing, and the satisfaction of seeing it come together reminded me why I loved what I did. It wasn't just about building something tangible, it was about creating something meaningful, something that lasted. One night after a long day, I pulled out Rachel's card. I stared at it for a while, debating, before finally dialing her number. She answered after the second ring. "David. Wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon." I laughed nervously. "Yeah, I figured I'd take you up on that coffee offer." "Still interested?" "Absolutely," she said. "When and where?" We met the next afternoon at a small cafe downtown. It wasn't a date, not really, just two people talking, sharing stories, and enjoying each other's company. But for the first time in a long time, I felt hope. It wasn't about rushing into something new. It was about realizing that life didn't end because of Katie's betrayal. There was still so much out there waiting for me, and for the first time I was ready to explore it. Meeting Rachel was a turning point, though I didn't realize it right away. That coffee meeting turned into a few more casual hangouts over the next couple of weeks. Nothing serious, just good conversations, a lot of laughs, and most importantly, no pressure. She had this way of putting people at ease. She didn't pry into my personal life or push me to share things I wasn't ready to talk about. Instead, she kept things light, talking about her projects, the absurdities of the business world, and her side passion for painting. One evening, over coffee, she said something that stuck with me. "You know, you can't rebuild your life if you're still holding on to the wreckage." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" She smiled. "You've got to let go of the anger, the what-ifs, all of it. It's not about forgiving whoever hurt you, it's about not letting them live in your head rent-free." I didn't tell her about Katie or Robert, not yet, but her words hit me like a ton of bricks. She was right. I'd spent so much time plotting revenge and dwelling on betrayal that I hadn't thought about what came after. That night, I went home and stared at the box of evidence I'd kept. The photos, emails, and notes from Rebecca's investigation. It was all over now. Robert's career was in ruins, Katie was out of my life, and I'd gotten the closure I needed. Keeping that box around felt like holding onto a weight I didn't need anymore. The next day, I shredded every piece of it. As the pages disappeared into the machine, I felt lighter, like I was finally closing the door on that chapter of my life. In the weeks that followed, I started focusing more on myself. I picked up old hobbies I'd abandoned, like running and woodworking. I even signed up for a community workshop where I met people outside of work, people who had nothing to do with my past. Rachel and I kept hanging out, and little by little I found myself opening up to her. I told her about Katie, about the affair, and how it had torn my life apart. I expected her to look at me differently, maybe with pity, but she didn't. Instead, she said, "That's a lot to carry. But you're here now, building something new. That takes strength." Her words stayed with me. She didn't see me as a victim or a broken man. She saw someone capable of moving forward. It wasn't long before I realized I could trust her. Not just with small talk or surface-level conversations, but with the deeper parts of myself I'd been guarding. One evening, we were sitting in the park watching the sunset, when she turned to me and asked, "What's next for you, David? What do you want out of life now?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. "I want peace. I want to build a life that feels real. Something that can't be taken away." She nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Sounds like a good plan." And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on my way to achieving it. It's funny how life changes when you let go of the past. A year ago, I couldn't see anything beyond the betrayal. Every moment was consumed by anger, revenge, and the weight of what had been taken from me. Now, I barely recognized the man I was back then. Rachel and I continued to grow closer. What started as casual hangouts turned into something deeper, though we took it slow. She never pressured me to move faster than I was ready for, which was a relief. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was with someone who saw me, not my success, not my failures, just the person I was underneath it all. One night, after dinner at her place, she asked me a question that caught me off guard. "Do you think you'll ever forgive her? Katie, I mean." I didn't answer right away. I stared at my glass of wine, swirling it absent-mindedly. "I don't know if I can," I said finally. "But I think I've forgiven myself for putting up with it for so long. That's enough for now." Rachel nodded, her hand resting lightly on mine. "That's a good start." It was. Work was thriving too. The big project Mitch and I had been working on was nearing completion, and it was already attracting attention. It felt good to pour my energy into something productive, to build something from scratch again. Mitch joked that I was better than ever, and honestly he wasn't wrong. As for Katie and Robert, they were nothing more than ghosts of my past now. Katie reached out once, months after the divorce was finalized. She left a voicemail, her voice shaky and full of regret. "David, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I hope you're happy now. I really do." I didn't call her back. Not because I was angry, I wasn't anymore, but because I didn't need to. Her chapter in my life was over, and I had no desire to reopen it. Robert, on the other hand, was still dealing with the fallout of his actions. Last I heard, he'd lost his business entirely and was facing multiple lawsuits. Part of me wanted to feel triumphant about his downfall, but instead I just felt nothing. He wasn't worth my energy anymore. One sunny Saturday morning, Rachel and I decided to take a trip to the lake. It was one of those perfect days, the kind that makes you feel like everything might just be okay. As we sat on the dock, feet dangling over the water, she leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "You seem different, you know. Happier." I smiled, watching the ripples in the water. "I think I finally am." And I meant it. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking back. I wasn't consumed by what had gone wrong or the people who'd hurt me. Instead, I was looking forward to new projects, new experiences, and maybe even a future with someone who saw me for who I truly was. Life wasn't perfect, but it felt real. And that was enough.